Hello and welcome to Gar Borras' Time Machine, episode 20, part 3. Now this is a three-part episode, as we said, Gar, and part 1 is about the classic 1973 film, American Graffiti, and then part 2 we talked all about the music and the soundtrack to American Graffiti, as well as Wolfman Jack, as he was a big part of both the film and the musical landscape back then. And today, part 3 is going to be very interesting because we're going to be talking about the 1979 follow-up film, More Graffiti, appropriately titled. And so let's get right into it. What did you think about this film from 1979, which to just kind of give people an idea of what we're talking, the release date of this film originally came out August 3rd, 1979.
Crazy. It's funny because when we discussed doing American Graffiti, I was completely unaware that there was ever a sequel that followed up the original, and not until you were so gracious to send me that DVD set that had the original American Graffiti and, as a bonus, the sequel.
Well, it'd been years since I'd seen the.
You're the person that made me aware that actually existed, and I have to admit that I am not a big fan of sequels because 95% of the time it's a disappointment. It's a very, very small percentage of sequels that are really super well received. So I just had this mental block, that it was going to be a disappointment. And then when I watched the movie, I became aware that it was a very large part of the original cast that was in the original movie, and so that really got my attention because it's a really good cast.
Yeah. And what's interesting is I have kind of the same story, even though I'm a little younger than you. I mean, kind of the same thing. I had no idea that there was a follow-up, a sequel to American Graffiti until I purchased that DVD. I went on Amazon and I think I paid $8 for it. I thought that's a pretty good deal. You get 2 movies apparently, okay. And then I went ahead and ordered the soundtrack. Now, what's interesting is I never heard of this film, and so I thought, you know what? I had the choice. I could just get the original movie, on DVD, or I could get this kind of double feature. I thought $8, that's not a bad deal. But then, like you said, I thought, if for no other reason, Gar, when we decided to do this episode on American Graffiti, before I even saw the film, because I didn't watch the film until just last night because I wanted to kind of prep myself for today's show, I thought, well, for no other reason, we got to make this a 3-part episode, because even before I even seen the film, I thought, if for no other reason do we need to do an hour dedicated to this movie, it's for the simple fact, no matter what we think, but to make people aware that it even exists. Because like you, I had no idea that this film even existed. And to further that point, I went on Ron Howard's official Wikipedia just to see. And oddly enough, while there's mention of American Graffiti, the original 1973 film, there is no mention of this film at all.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. When we were originally talking about this, you were mentioning how it was really interesting how when they released American Graffiti, they were not expecting it to be a hugely successful movie.
Yeah.
And there was, it had its success in spite of all of the, lack of support from the studios.
Yeah,
making it.
Yeah.
Because everybody was just looking at it as a low budget movie, that probably wasn't going to amount to anything. And then all of a sudden the movie turns out to be this gigantic, huge success. So they never really expected much success from the original movie, and it turned out to be a huge success.
Yeah.
And then you brought up that here's the sequel, where now, because of the huge success, now they got a huge budget from the studio, and now everybody's hugs and kisses and being all supportive, and they're expecting the sequel to be hugely successful, and it really didn't do that well at the box office.
Yeah, and what's interesting is we got to know, like we mentioned in the part one of this is back when the original film came out in 1973, Ron Howard was kind of the star power as far as the cast. I mean, all those other people that appeared in the film, they were kind of up-and-coming stars, and American Graffiti launched all those people's career, which is by the time you get to 1979 and this second film comes out, More Graffiti is what it is called, they're thinking, okay, by the time 1979 rolls around, Ron Howard is once again a major TV star on Happy Days. Happy Days has been on TV for a few years. By then, Laverne and Shirley has been on. So Cindy Williams' star power has kind of risen. And then Mackenzie Phillips was on One Day at a Time. By then, Suzanne Summers was not, in this particular film. But by then, Three's Company was on. So a lot of the people who were in the original film had much stronger star power by the time the second film came out.
Yeah, it's the thing that I loved so much about the movie, was because I grew up during that time,
Vietnam era.
And I was well aware of all of the elements that were very appealing in the movie. The muscle cars. The being a college age at that time period. All of the social norms of that time period that are very different now. Whenever I watch a movie about a particular time period, if I want to use one particular movie as an example, even though it's not exactly the same time period.
Let's hear it.
But it's a great example. There was a movie called Dazed and Confused.
Oh yes.
And the movie was popular.
Yeah, I remember.
And and I watched the movie because it was really about being that college age in the 70s, and that's really me. So when I watched Dazed and Confused, they somewhat kind of got the way people were dressed back then. They somewhat did it, but they kind of infused what was popular in the 90s also into it, that just kind of ruined the authenticity of it. If you're going to do a time period piece, you want to really do the research and get the type of clothes that people were wearing. You really want to get what people were talking about during those times. You really want to capture that time period. You want to really accurately represent. But there are some movies, and I have to put Dazed and Confused in it because I grew up, that's my generation, and they did not accurately represent that time period. And so it was more like, a bunch of people, well, let's make one about that time period, and I don't know, let's try this. I don't know, let's try that. Instead of doing the research and really getting it accurate, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
they just kind of tried to fudge it.
See, that's the thing. Yeah.
Here's more American Graffiti, and it is done maybe 10 years later.
Yeah.
Of a time period. And because the time period was so fresh when they made the movie, they really got it accurate.
Yeah, and
that was really what it was like to be college age in the mid 1960s. It really was. What they were depicting about the Vietnam War, what they were depicting about the rebellion of the younger generation against during that time period, they used to have a term for it, the establishment. That's what they used to call it back in the 1960s, the establishment. And that when the establishment was viewed by the young generation as an authoritarian figure, and that generation was very anti-authoritarian. And that's what more American Graffiti really captures. Like I said, they captured it probably because it was still so fresh when they made the movie. Where when you make these movies many decades later, those things aren't fresh, so they don't really get the importance of how it played in the whole social scheme of things during that time period. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I want to kind of talk a little bit about you bringing up Dazed and Confused, because I will say More Graffiti to me was a much better film for the very reasons you said. Now, Dazed and Confused, I will tell you, I do remember going to see it in the theater when it was out, but I went to see the film, Dazed and Confused, more for the music. I'll give you a perfect example. I love the fact, okay, here's a film. They named it after a Led Zeppelin song. They had, I think, Peter Frampton, Ted Nugent, but I love many of the songs on the soundtrack, so I went more for the music, and because, hey, picture named after a Led Zeppelin song. How cool is that? But this was much more of a, like you said, a more accurate follow-up to the original film. Now, what I found very interesting, and this has a lot more to do with my age, is, okay, you go back to 1973 when the original film American Graffiti came out. Look how different everybody kind of looked. Even you look at Ron Howard, okay? Looked very young. He was very young when the original film came out. By the time this 1970 rolls around, you see him in the film, he is got a mustache. Not that it's a huge deal, but you know what I mean? So
yeah, but it's so trippy to see him with a mustache.
Yeah, and part of it's what I'm getting at is because of my age, I'd seen him in the Anthony Griffith Show, but I really first seen him on Happy Days, and so when I think of Ron Howard, that is my image of him, this nerdy kind of golly gee fonts type of guy who always does the right thing, and he's really dependable, and he can be counted on. And then even in the first American Graffiti, to see him holding during one of the scenes, drinking a beer and being one of the guys, and by the time the second film comes out, like I said, he's a few years later, he's got a mustache. He looks so different from what we used to seeing him on TV. And then even in More Graffiti, what I noticed in watching that film is if you watch the beginning credits, it's not starring Ron Howard. It's a special appearance by Ron Howard. Part of the reason is that he's like one of the backstories in the film. He's not like one of the main stories, which I found kind of interesting. And to see the way him and Cindy Williams, they're married, they have a couple kids by the time More Graffiti comes around, and you're seeing kind of what their life is like. Beginning of More Graffiti, they're kind of telling their friends, hey, we're pregnant, we're gonna have a kid. And by the end of the film, they have like 2 kids, and they've grown up a little, and you see what people typically go through. But I was not used to, I could not even imagine seeing Ron Howard say some cuss words, and he's kind of a jerk to his wife and cussing her out, and she's cussing him back. And even to see Cindy Williams, kind of acting like that, that's not the sweet Shirley that I grew up with on, Laverne and Shirley. So to that kind of shows you the power of these actors that, hey, there's more to Ron Howard than just Richie Cunningham. And I thought that was kind of an interesting aspect of the film.
Well, that it's so trippy how, they had, that was the thing that really got my attention was the cast.
Yeah.
A lot of times when they do a sequel, they might keep like one person from the original movie, but in most cases when they do sequels, it's a new cast.
Yeah.
And just right there gives the sequel a disadvantage because now the public has to try to kind of get used to visualizing these different people as the same characters. You see what I mean?
Yeah. In fact,
so this one, really had a very large portion of the original cast from the original movie, and that really got my attention because I had it in my mind. It's just this a classic case of blinding yourself to something and without even giving it a chance. That's exactly what I was doing. I was not giving this movie a chance, and because I just had that stereotype in my head about a sequel, and this movie really kind of shattered that because they also had a much larger budget to make the sequel too, because of the huge success of the original movie. Because they had a much larger budget, you could watch this one and definitely see the production upgrades and how the movie was being presented. It was very differently done from the original, in a different style. It kind of adding a little more of a modern to the 70s time period of the technology that was available at that time, and they were just kind of incorporating that, where the original movie was so low budget. It was so obvious right from the get-go. It was a low-budget movie and had very little money behind it being made. But this More American Graffiti had a very large budget, and it was really nice the way they did the production in the movie and how they presented it, which was very different from the original. I really liked it.
I think there's a lot of reasons for that. I mean, the most obvious one was by the time 1979 rolls around, George Lucas had put out Star Wars, which was a massive hit, the first one. And by the time 1979 rolls around, he's working on the follow-up, Empire Strikes Back. He's working on the first Indiana Jones film with Steven Spielberg. And by the time Star Wars comes around, and he's had success with first American Graffiti and Star Wars, he's now a major player in Hollywood. And by the time it comes time to do, they offer him to do a sequel. He kind of he's busy working on his next real major creation, Star Wars, and so he kind of turns it down because he really can't dedicate the time that he wants to, that he thinks that he should, and so he's concentrating on Star Wars at this point. They get this other guy who directs More Graffiti. It's directed and written by Bill L. Norton, and so you got a new director. So that's part of the reason for when you have a different director, to have a different view, a different vision. So that's got a huge part to do with why this is so different from the original film.
Well, he did a good job. I was watching the credits, and I was going, I've never heard of this guy, as the director, and but no, he did a very good job. I liked the way they kind of some people don't like where movies will jump from here and jump to there, and you don't know whether you're, in 1964 or 1965 because they're jumping between. You see what I mean? And they kind of did that with this. They were jumping from fast forward to the future, backtrack back to this time. You know what I mean? They were kind of going back and forth like that, but it wasn't done. It wasn't overdone.
Yeah, what I read about,
it just, to me, I felt it worked.
What I read about that was the director thought, okay, first the point was let's have kind of three. I think they had like 3 or 4 different storylines, and he said, okay, the film is gonna go through like 4 separate New Year's Eves, so it's like 4 New Year's Eve nights in a row, and I didn't like that at first, but then I love the way the film kind of opens up and the way it ended. So once you see the whole film, like you, I kind of thought, okay, you know what, it worked. I see what they were doing here now. And what's interesting, like I said, Ron Howard is in even in the leading role. He makes a special appearance if you read the credits, and the film had more to do with the race car driver John Miller and Terry Bateau, which is kind of like this nerd type character from the original film. Now, I guess you could say he's grown up. He's gone ahead, and beginning of the film, he's getting ready to go off to Vietnam, and by the end of the film, he's died. And one of the girls throughout the movie saying, at one point she says, I had these 2 friends. They died like on the same day but different years. On New Year's Eve. And I mean, that's kind of trippy to think, but that's kind of it's kind of interesting what, like, this guy Terry Bateau is like a nerd type in the first. He's much more of a main character. You kind of get to see, okay, this is what this guy has made of his life. And
he blooms as a man.
Yeah. I mean, to me, this was a real coming of age film in that regard, because you see this guy was like not much of a character in the first film. He really, like you said, he blooms. He comes to life.
Congratulations, you're normal.
And it's almost like
that line.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That just says
it all
right there.
Yeah.
How much he matured. When he's saying things like that.
I felt like
it's just I have to bring up what's his name, Milner, the drag racer. Now, I just have to admit, what was Anya? What was her name? She didn't speak a word.
Eva.
And she was from Sweden. What an absolutely beautiful girl.
Yeah,
oh my gosh. It's just like, even if I met a girl like that and she couldn't speak a word of English, I'd still fall in love with her.
Yeah, you make a good point on that, because I was reading, I think her name was Ava, and he meets her, and she speaks almost no English, and they really have this relationship where it doesn't matter, but they kind of don't understand each other, verbally and that, but they somehow understand. They seem to have
liked each other.
Yeah. I mean, and that kind of shows you where true love is maybe all that really matters.
That is a really interesting element of the movie, because how often do you watch a movie where you have 2 characters in the movie actually having chemistry with each other, but yet they can't speak a word of each other's language?
Yeah, and then I loved his buddy, the other guy, that, I speak German, and he's speaking to her, and even though she doesn't really understand German, somehow they're communicating too.
Yeah. It's so weird.
Yeah.
I have to admit, I was really, really rooting for Milner.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I just, I liked how they made him more of a main character in the movie, and I really was rooting for him, and it just made me feel really good, when he was able to patch it up with Ava,
Yeah.
She starts, wanting to be, contribute, so she puts on one of his shirts and trying to hand people tools, and she's trying to help out, but yet she can't speak a word of English, and everybody else around here is speaking English. It was just such a very interesting element. It's very unusual. You just don't see that element as part of storylines in movies.
Yeah, and she was a lot more. The girl who played Ava, she was a lot more of a film than Suzanne Summers was in the original film. But I kind of equate it to that role.
Yes,
She
was that element in the movie because every guy watching the movie had to have the same reaction. What an absolutely stunningly beautiful woman she was.
And I don't care who the guy was. I don't think, like you say. I don't think they care if they could really communicate. They'd want to try. They'd want to.
I really liked that.
Yeah.
It was neat. And then the other thing was when his shoot didn't come out, and he wound up crashing and messing up his front end of his dragster, and then his competitors rallied behind him and started helping him out to get his car,
in the race,
so he could do that last race. And that also was just another element, a human element of the movie that I really loved, that you don't see also very often in movies too. It was people that really normally, they're competitors. They're not friends, but yet all of a sudden they became friends right then and right there.
Yeah,
and they became very supportive of each other. And man, I just love that element.
What's very interesting is you look in More Graffiti, the two guys they made the main character, John Miller and Terry Bateau. Now, in the first film, John Miller's still this cool kind of James Dean type of guy. All the girls love and want to be with him. And yet he was kind of friends with this Terry Bateau that, he kind of let him kind of tag along. He felt sorry for him. Oh, hey, come on, you can hang out with me. And it's kind of interesting. Those two guys are ones that get killed in the film, And again, John Miller, when he's killed in the car crash, you think, okay, how awful, he dies tragically young. But you know what? He went out in a blaze of glory. He won the race, and he was kind of the James Dean of the film. He dies tragically young, but he's remembered as a hero. The other guy that used to tag along with him, he's killed in another way in Vietnam a few years later. And people that ever made fun of him or thought he was a nerd or whatever, that's another guy. The way he died, he's remembered now as a hero.
Well, they kind of left that open-ended because at the very end of the movie,
missing in action
with that helicopter pilot, when he was leaving, after he blew up the crap house and it went all over the military brass. When he wound up doing that, and everybody thought that he was dead, he basically was saying that he was going to go live in Europe. So they kind of left it open-ended that, everybody at home was going to think that he died. But he actually went off to live in Europe and, very well could have continued on with his life and, and everything like that. So it was kind of weird how they did that at the end of the movie. It was, just a lot of different twists to the storyline that are very unusual for storylines.
Yeah, and what's interesting too is let's talk a little bit about Wolfman Jack in this film, because he makes an appearance, but throughout the film it's only like a voiceover appearance, which is very different. So what did you think about that?
Well, yeah, who knows what was the reasoning behind it? Because I have no idea.
Yeah.
But you can't do a 1960s time period without his voice being on the radio.
Yeah.
You just can't do it. I lived during that time. The radio was on all the time when I was a kid, and which brings up another thing. The soundtrack to More American Graffiti is absolutely stellar.
Yeah, let's go down the list. I mean,
virtually every song that I heard that was part of the soundtrack was what was being played on the radio at that time.
Yeah, I gotta say, one of the things I really loved about the way the film ended, as the credits start to roll, the song that starts playing is Bob Dylan's "Like a Rolling Stone," which I just thought, I don't know why, but it was a perfect tune to end the film with. Maybe because it was a song from that time. It reminds you of what a great songwriter Bob Dylan is. I mean, as we sit here and talk, he recently turned 80 years old, but how many Bob Dylan songs do you just love? You know what I mean? Knocking on Heaven's Door, like a Rolling Stone. I also had to bring up a number of years ago, the Rolling Stones, of all people, did a great cover of this song, so I urge people to check that out. But just some great music on here.
Well, at that same time that you felt that way about Bob Dylan when they started doing that song during the credits, I felt exactly the same way, Jason.
I mean, I let the credits roll because I wanted to hear the song all the way through. You know what I mean?
I did too.
Yeah.
You're not alone, Jason. You felt that way. Well, guess what? I felt exactly that way at exactly that time in the movie.
Yeah, and then I was looking at some other songs that appear on the soundtrack. Heat Wave by Martha Vandellas is another song I've heard throughout the years, just love. Stop in the Name of Love by the Supremes. Strange Brew by Cream, which is a great kind of hard rock band from the 70s, featuring, of course, Eric Clapton.
That was during their flower power period,
Hang On Sloopy, that's another cool song from that time by the McCoys. Again, that's one of those songs that I think you and I were talking about when we did the last episode. You happened to mention that, and I've never even heard of the McCoys, but I've heard of a song, but I never heard of who did it. You know what I mean? One of those songs.
Well, that soundtrack for More American Graffiti is an absolutely stellar soundtrack.
Yeah.
The movie without that soundtrack would not have been as good as it was. That's how much of an impact that soundtrack had on the movie.
Yeah.
It really was a difference maker.
Yeah, and I gotta bring up Bob Dylan again, because what a great songwriter this guy is, and his music's had such a huge influence just on everybody around the world all these years. But you playing a Guns N' Roses tribute.
We're heaping all kinds of praise on this movie.
Yeah.
And anybody that listens to this, I guess, would you call this a podcast, Jason?
I guess so. I mean, I don't know what else to call it, or a show.
I don't know what else to call it either. So I'm just starting to kind of call it a podcast.
Yeah, I think. Yeah.
Whenever I explain it to people, that's what people wind up feeding back to me. Oh, a podcast.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because I don't know what to call it.
I mean,
I got on a podcast and I forgot what I was going to say.
That's all right. I had a lot of the same thoughts going into this as far as talking about more graffiti before I seen the film, because I thought, how could this film be any good when I've never even heard of it? I mean, it's a little, and I'm thinking, and then I read today, like, it's not even included on Ron Howard's official Wikipedia, and I don't know why that is, because he was in a good chunk of the film. I think more people remember the first film, but the point I was getting ready to make about Bob Dylan's influence on music, and being included on the soundtrack, the fact that you play in a Guns N' Roses tribute, and of course they did a great cover of "Knocking on Heaven's Door." You've covered that in your with your band, right?
Yes. It's a very important part of the set.
And so, what I was going to ask you, when you first heard that song, were you even aware of it? It was a Bob Dylan song, or did you find that out later after you'd heard the Guns N' Roses version?
Oh, I knew it.
Okay.
I knew it from a long time ago.
Yeah.
I knew it all the way back from when it was original by Bob Dylan.
Wow. Yeah.
So, because, I mean, my cousins, my uncle was in the military, and they were stationed. Their family was stationed in South America, and they moved back here to the United States, and when they came back to the United States. They were introducing my sister and I to all of the popular music that they were listening to at that time, and Bob Dylan was part of it. It was my cousins that introduced me to Bob Dylan way back in the 1960s.
Oh, I bet, and he's been around since then, and why people ask why are you making such a big deal about Bob Dylan? My point is talking about the soundtrack. This is just one guy that's had that kind of influence. When I went on our Facebook page, they let people know that we're recording part 3 of our American Graffiti show, and we're going to be talking about this show, More Graffiti. I happen to talk about the fact that Bob Dylan was featured on the soundtrack, and Buddy Holly and some of these other people, and I forget the guy's name, but somebody commented that, hey, did you know on the original American Graffiti soundtrack, George Lucas wanted to include like an Elvis Presley tune, but his manager at the time, Colonel Parker, he would not release a licensing fee so they could do it. And again, that just is kind of the music business.
Yes. Money.
Yeah.
Money.
And we mentioned Buddy Holly, which another interesting story. You and I were talking about the last time, the fact that not only does Buddy Holly have a sound appear on the original American Graffiti soundtrack, but he died in a plane crash course with Richie Valens, the Big Bopper, and they often refer to that day that plane crash as the day the music died. And that's the kind of influence these musicians have had on so many countless lives. It become the soundtrack of our lives.
Well, it's the soundtrack for our lives and these movies.
Yeah.
That's what I was, getting ready to kind of talk about. We're heaping all this praise on this movie, and most people have never really even heard of this movie, or are even aware, that it's out there and everything like that. And we're just like heaping all of this praise on the movie, and the truth is this is one of those
lost gems.
Yes, like a page from another time period, a faded page from another time period. Yeah. I guess that's the best way to kind of describe it.
Yeah.
Because now that's basically what More American Graffiti is it's a faded page from another time period. But I just feel that I don't, unfortunately, everybody has different likes and everybody has different, but for me, one of those things, that's so important is, understanding about different time periods and stuff like that. And so I like to watch movies, and the more accurate the movie is to that time period, and more how well it really captures that time period, the more I like the movie, because they put so much into it to be able to do that. You really have to do the research. You really have to do a lot of effort to be able to capture a time period in that way.
Yeah.
And and there are a lot of movies out there that do capture those time periods really well.
Yeah.
But this one, if for any reason for anyone to see it, if you're from a younger generation that only has no idea, never lived through it,
Yeah.
and only hears about it, then watching this movie is a great opportunity to really have a more accurate representation of that time period. So when you're watching it, you're really actually being able to absorb how it was back in those days.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's, if there's any reason to see it, that is it. And then also, if you're from an older generation like my generation or older, then it's, you can easily watch the movie and just absolutely enjoy it for the same reasons, because you were there and they really did capture it.
Yeah,
They really did.
They did, and what's interesting in doing this episode on More Graffiti is I was amazed, maybe not totally amazed, but how little information I was able to find online about it outside of the More Graffiti Wikipedia page. I found a few other little facts here and there, but not as much as I did about the original film. And I'm kind of curious and thinking, I wonder, maybe it was not as heavily advertised. I mean, I did find a trailer that I posted on our Facebook page. People can check out of the film when it came out, that they had from 1979. Kind of interesting, like a little movie clip. But I'm wondering, like, if a lot of people didn't maybe like the fact that Vietnam was featured in there. That's kind of controversial. A lot of people don't like to see, people dying and stuff. I wonder how much that had to do with it,
I'm sorry, I got interrupted. What was that again, Jason?
Oh, I was saying, I wonder how, very little I was able to find about this movie online outside of a Wikipedia page. And I'm wondering how curious, maybe this wasn't heavily advertised, when it came out. Obviously, maybe.
Well, I don't know. All I can do is speculate.
Yeah.
Because for me, that wouldn't make sense because, the movie had such a good budget.
Yeah, and high expectations. That's
to
interesting.
work with, in making the movie, because they had so much better of a budget than they did when they made the original.
Yeah, see, this, in prepping for this and watching the movie last night, what I found very interesting is, like you said, I went in it not thinking I was going to like it as much. I liked it better than I thought I would. And this is kind of a case of, I thought, when I got the idea to do, okay, we're going to do a segment on the second film, More Graffiti. If for no other reason, I want to see the film. I want to see what it was like. It's kind of one of those things where, before you go and say you don't like something, give it a try. Put the DVD in the player, watch the film, even halfway through, and you can decide if you like it or not. But not once did I hit the stop button. I watched it all the way through, and I liked it. And I think if you and I had that kind of experience, I think if just one person hears this show we do, and they go and say, what, I'm going to go check out that movie from 1979, then we've accomplished something, because it'll mean one more person, took the time to check the film out before they decide they don't like it.
Well, I find it hard to believe anybody, not liking it, what I mean? But, there's always the possibility, that somebody's not going to like it. But I just have to thank you, because I was that classic case of not giving the movie any chance at all.
Well, here's the thing, Gar. How can you give a film a chance? And this is my same story. When you don't even know it exists,
Yes. I didn't even know it existed. I'm hugely thankful, that you were insisting on doing this, because, I got a chance to, see something, that was really good.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed it. They did a really good job. They had all of the elements. When I was a kid growing up back in the 60s, virtually every street had a family living on that street that had a son, that basically the family relinquished the garage to that son, and that became his hangout, where he worked on his cars, and his friends came and hang out with him while he's working on the cars in his garage.
Yeah.
That was classic 1965 America here in Southern California.
Yeah, and in wrapping this up for today, another thing I found interesting about More Graffiti was, while it still featured the car racing, that was a part of a film and part of a story, it was not as heavily about cruising and hanging out and the classic cars, although, like you said, racing was a big part of More Graffiti. That lifestyle, but it was not the main focus of the film. The main focus was kind of, okay, we're updating you on where these people are in their life at this time.
Well, here's another thing, just to kind of get a visualization, because I grew up in West Covina.
Yeah.
And there was maybe a couple of cities over, there was Irwindale.
Okay.
And back in the 1960s, when you lived in, that was the San Gabriel Valley, that was called the East San Gabriel Valley.
Yeah.
And, Irwindale Raceway was a drag strip that now it's still there, but it's no longer a drag strip. Mm-hmm. It's like a lower league NASCAR raceway where they're where they do kind of like NASCAR races on a smaller track. Mm-hmm. And I've been there. I like going to watch the races and stuff. But back in the 1960s, that was a drag strip.
Wow.
And there was there was dragsters. There was cars that were all pre-funny car stuff that was going on back in those days. The cars were so loud because Irwindale wasn't super far away, but it wasn't super close.
Yeah.
But yet the cars were so loud you could hear them all the way from where I lived in West Covina.
Wow.
And that's like insanely loud. Yeah. It's so loud, and you have to keep this in mind that back in the 1960s they didn't know about ear protection.
Yeah.
They do now.
Yeah.
I guarantee you, because those cars were so loud, I guarantee you there were people that were going to that drag strip that were not protecting their ears that lost hearing from that drag strip because it was so loud. Yeah. Now, but this getting back to my point is, think about it. Here I am, a kid. What am I? Maybe about somewhere between 10 and 13 years old.
Yeah.
Back in the 1980s, somewhere between 8 and 13. And you can hear this drag strip from your house. Yeah. And you got every street that's got somebody that's working on their cars. It's just, everybody was, if you were college age, that was a big part. You worked on your car. You did whatever you could to make your car like those cars that were at the drag strip.
Yeah, it was a lifestyle. Yeah.
And now, I have a feeling, I don't know for sure, I can't really prove it unless I go back and do the research, but I have a very strong gut feeling that drag strip that they used in that movie was Irwindale drag strip.
I think you're right, because, I was reading something about that just a few days ago, and I think you were right. That's what I was reading.
Wow, I don't know for sure.
Yeah.
But that, I used to hear that drag strip when I was a kid, and there's just no way you can be a kid and not have that influence you in about loving loud, fast.
Yeah, loud, fast.
Cars, and there were the elements of the car. Back in those days, it was popular to raise the rear end of your car, where the front is kind of almost pointing downwards and a downward slope.
Yeah, I mean, in fact,
and putting the big slick tires in the back of your car with the mag wheels. That's classic 1960s cars.
Yeah.
Anybody that lived in Southern California during that time, if they didn't have a car with a raised rear end with big tires on the back and mag wheels, then they knew somebody that did. If you didn't have it yourself, you absolutely positively knew other people that did.
I mean, it was a lifestyle back then, like you're saying, and what's interesting is they have NASCAR today, and that's much more of a corporate thing, but people still love racing. That's why they have NASCAR. And I gotta say, Gar, in wrapping this up today, I could not do this show without you, because what I was kind of worried about today doing this is, like I said, I could not find a whole lot of information on this film outside of Wikipedia, but I thought between me and Gar, we're gonna have enough to talk about. And I think what made this episode so special was the fact that you and me took the time to watch the film. So we still had enough to talk about, because we have an honest opinion on how we reacted to the film and the music. And I think if I like to think that maybe we'll do more episodes of this type, maybe of films and stuff that people aren't as aware of, but this is a show on pop culture, so we do talk about a lot of stuff that was popular at times that people love, and that's why we do this. But I think this is going to be a fun episode 20 to listen back on, because when I post this next weekend, people can go back, and if they haven't had a chance, they can listen to part 1, which is on the original film. Part 2 was on the soundtrack and the music and Wolfman Jack. Part 3 we did today is on more graffiti, the follow-up film, but not a whole lot of people, including us, even knew existed, until we decided to do this.
I am so glad that you insisted that we do this.
Yeah, and just to let people know, Gar, what we have coming up, because we have so many exciting things that we haven't even discussed yet, but just to kind of whet people's out, next time when we get together in 2 weeks, we're going to be talking about another fun one, probably the most different thing we've ever talked about. 50th anniversary of the Godfather film. And I say different because it's a different type of film. It's kind of it's got blood and guts. It's a gangster film. So there's going to be so much to talk about. All the actors and people behind the film. Francis Ford Coppola. The fact that it's 50 years later. And, the impact it's had on pop culture. And then after that, we were planning to do an episode on the Adventures of Superman, so that's going back to another fun time in the 50s. I think that's the first time we'll be discussing something from the 50s, so I'm looking forward to that.
I can't wait. Both of those, are very impactful on my life.
Yeah.
The Superman stuff was, like a huge deal to me when I was like, elementary school age.
Yeah.
When that was going on, and or pre-elementary school. I think I was maybe, kind of kindergarten, first grade-ish.
Yeah.
Age when that was being shown on TV, and it's a very special time period, of my life.
And what I think is going to make that so much fun to talk about Superman is the fact that probably people aren't even aware of this. Younger people, but before the Superman TV show, Superman was originally on the radio, and that's one of the things I'm going to enjoy talking about. Kind of the transition from Superman from the comics to the radio to the TV, and even what it is today.
Well, it's It's gonna be fun.
Well,
I guarantee you that. For me, it's just I always like to include the elements of backstory to kind of give you a mental visualization of the time. That's
why we do this, and you take us back every time in your time machine and go to a different time period, and that's why we do this, because, like I said, we've only scratched the surface. There's so many things I want to do an episode on, but we'll get into that later. So, once again, Gar Borras, it's been a pleasure. Take care, my friend.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed this one, dude.
Yeah. Okay, so hold on for just a minute, Gar, before I let you go.
Okay.
Chaotic Riffs Magazine.